Nebbia is a revolutionary showerhead that saves you money by using 45% less water, but with a stream of water that's way more powerful than what you get with other showerheads. To get 15% off, go to nebbia.com/Pakman and use the code Pakman. So in the aftermath of the January 6th Trump riots and the hundreds and hundreds of arrests and starting to see the processing into the court system of some of the alleged criminals, the rioters, one of the questions that we've discussed and one of the questions that's come up is not only what are these individuals going to be charged with, but what would prosecutors be able to prove? And some of the most serious charges that could be levied against some of these individuals would be charges of sedition. And as we said when we talked about this, maybe a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago at this point, as some of these cases were starting to be built, was that sedition, much like perjury, can be obvious colloquially and yet very difficult to prove in a court of law, because you do need to be able to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that the mindset of the perpetrator is knowable and that you can say this was their intent when they, in the case of perjury, said something that was untrue under untrue under oath, and meant to overthrow the government when they were participating in the Trump riots. Well, it appears as though prosecutors, at least in some of these cases, believe that they can do that, because there's a new New York Times report from just the last few hours, which says that, quote, evidence the government obtained in the investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol most likely meets the bar necessary to charge some of the suspects with sedition, according to Michael Sherwin, a federal prosecutor who's been leading the Justice Department's inquiry. This was from an interview yesterday. The department has rarely brought charges of sedition, writes the New York Times, the crime of conspiring to overthrow the government. But in an interview with 60 Minutes, Sherwin said, quote, I personally believe the evidence is trending toward that and probably meets those elements. I believe the facts do support those charges. And I think that as we go forward, more facts will support that. This is obviously not going to be the charge for most of the hundreds of people that are going to be charged or have been charged here, but it appears as though some will be, and this is major. It's been 11 years. You have to go back to 2010 for the last time that there was a federal charge of sedition, and that was a charge against a Michigan militia of plotting to provoke an armed conflict with the government in order to overthrow it. They were ultimately acquitted. And back then, and this goes to mindset, the judge in the Michigan case from 2010 said that the Justice Department, federal prosecutors, did not prove the defendants were concretely trying to oppose and overthrow the United States government. So this is going to be, I don't want to say these are landmark cases. It seems hyperbolic, but this will be a really big deal, because now we have not only rioters inspired by Trump, not only rioters inspired by the lies from Trump and his followers and others on the right, that Joe Biden stole the election as the reason that they were doing this. But we may see some of these very, very serious federal charges of sedition, and it's going to take some time for all of this to work through the system and to ultimately see what is there. Now, I think it's also important in terms of expectation setting. Even if there are charges of sedition, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see trials with guilty, not guilty verdicts deciding on sedition. You could see some of these individuals, rioters, charged with sedition initially, but then it never goes to trial, and there's a plea agreement where they agree to plead guilty to something lower. And there's no question. I mean, listen, if you said it's a numbers game, if you see 10 sedition charges, I don't know how many you'll see. If you see 10 sedition charges, I would imagine that the vast majority, 7, 8, you never get a trial on sedition charges and an eventual not guilty verdict. I think most of them, they get pled down. And part of the reason would be, I mean, listen, on both sides, based on the history of federal sedition charges, if you're the lawyer for one of these rioters, you understand that although it may not be likely to be found guilty on sedition, it's a very big hill to climb for the federal prosecutors, that if your client was guilty of sedition, it would be really bad. So you may go to them and say, listen, it's really in our interests not to put this to trial. And you may have a rioter who's more likely to accept a plea on some lesser charge. If you're the prosecutors even, I mean, listen, even if you feel pretty good about a sedition charge, if it's not bulletproof as far as you're concerned, it's also a risk to you to put that to trial and possibly get an acquittal and end up getting nothing against some of these rioters. So we may see the charges. The prosecutor says that he believes there's evidence for it, a sedition charge on some of these cases. But I think if you get it, both sides would be well incentivized to plead it down. And I wouldn't be at all shocked if very few or even none of the sedition charges ever actually go to trial, where you get a determination of guilt or lack of guilt on a sedition charge. I could be wrong. We're going to follow it. That's the latest we know as of right now. President Joe Biden, who some on the left framed as a neoliberal warmonger thirsty for wars and colonialism around the world, wants to completely re-examine and evaluate the global troop presence of the United States and maybe decrease it in some significant way. And what's interesting about this story, it's not been getting a lot of attention. And it's not surprising to me that it's not getting a lot of attention, because this is the exact type of story that does terribly when we talk about it, because the sensible left is sort of like, yeah, we sort of knew that Biden wasn't a bloodthirsty warmonger, so this isn't surprising. The anti-Biden left just doesn't want to hear it because it runs counter to their narrative. And it's really what the right expects. I mean, I know that the right under Trump cheered this talking point of Trump didn't start any new wars, but it's not actually their preferred position on foreign policy. The preferred position of the reactionary right is Democratic presidents are weak because they don't want to use the military, and they often want to shrink the military. That's the lane in which the right is most comfortable critiquing Democratic presidents. So the news is, to start at the beginning, that the Joe Biden administration has launched a full systemic review of the global presence of the U.S. military to ensure that it is, quote, correctly sized and supports strategy. So at the top, that's not the language of our military's presence is too small and we should figure out ways to make it much bigger. That's kind of the starting point. Foreign policy analysts believe that this is exactly the type of review that could lead to recommendations to reduce the number of bases abroad, something I've been talking about for a decade, reduce the number of troops deployed around the world. Now, of course, we should all be skeptical that it will turn into action, given two things. Number one, given all of the different ways that Republicans can obstruct, we have to wonder whether even a recommendation of reducing the U.S. global troop presence will turn into a reality. On the other hand, we've also heard this from other presidents, right? I mean, we heard this from Obama. We've even heard it from Republican presidents, and rarely do things change dramatically. Right now, the U.S. has about 800, quote, bases around the world. It's an incredible top line number. The truth is that includes some very small outposts that few of us would see a picture of and say that's a base, all the way up to massive complexes with thousands of troops and their families. I mean, just huge installations. Germany is a place where there are many. There are some in Italy. Many of these are essentially vestiges of the Cold War that we really don't need and arguably are a detriment to American foreign policy. And for me, this is not just a moral issue, although it is one, but it's also an economic issue. We talk about tax rates and how we can afford things that some want to do. Putting aside for a second modern monetary theory and a more nuanced understanding of debt and deficit, and putting aside the macroeconomic discussion, the micro of the budget is not trivial. Half of American discretionary spending is on military and defense. So we can talk about tax rates, of course. And last week we talked about, okay, should we raise taxes on people making over 400,000 or over 1 million or over 2 million? Where should it be? But imagine, without changing anything about taxation, what we could afford with current tax revenues if we change spending priorities and reduce the amount that we're spending on defense and the military. And without a doubt, that there's a huge I'll believe it when I see it component, as I mentioned earlier. But this is sort of like a wow. What is the truth of Biden's foreign policy? And to be clear, this is not a wow, Biden is the super progressive on foreign policy. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. The point here is, just like some on the left insisted Hillary would have started 5 new wars, and there was really no reason to believe that that's what would happen, the people expecting Biden to do the same and to grow the troop presence are going to be disappointed. Now, Joe Biden did decide to pause and re-examine troop withdrawals that were started or at least announced by Donald Trump. I'm talking about Afghanistan and Germany, where Trump said, let's pull out, and Joe Biden got in and said, we're going to pause that. Let's wait and see, okay? Because the position of the Biden administration is essentially, these are my words, not theirs, but this is the way I understand it. Trump was so incompetent that it's worth reviewing everything Trump was in the middle of before we decide whether to continue it. My hope is that Biden reviews those 2 withdrawals, Germany and Afghanistan, and does this bigger reevaluation and says, let's continue and then let's do more. At the same time, troops in Germany is far less controversial than many other deployments. And so I think that the U.S. has a comically high number of bases in Germany, and many of them are completely unnecessary. I don't know that I would have started in Germany necessarily when I think about reducing our troop spread around the world. It doesn't matter. The point is, we're going to wait and see what Joe Biden actually decides on those 2. We're also going to see what the outcome is of this systemic review of the global troop presence around the world. And listen, I know some people will write to me and say, David, you're so naive. He's not doing anything. The point is, there was a narrative about Biden's going to start all these new wars. He's going to be the neoliberal, dominionist of some kind. There was never any evidence of that. And so far, what we're seeing is also not indicative of that. If you disagree with me, let me know. You can find me on Twitter at @Pakman. And this Friday, it's finally time. This Friday, March 26th, we are doing a 1-day membership bonanza. We're looking for massive dumps of new memberships to make up for a really crappy February. If you want to be notified of this 1-day membership special, it's very easy. Get on my newsletter at davidpakman.com. Friday, you'll get an email telling you everything you need to know, and probably even some things you don't need to know. One of our sponsors today is Nebbia, the creator of the world's most innovative shower head. It uses only about half the water that other shower heads do, saving you money, helping the environment, but it's actually a lot more powerful than other shower heads on the market. It has twice the coverage of other shower heads. The water sprays with a ton of pressure. I've been using it in my bathroom at home. I love it. Only took a few minutes to set up, really easy, and it's been a totally different experience than any other shower head I've used. I can get in and out of the shower way quicker now because of how powerful it is. It only takes a few seconds to get completely rinsed off. So I was actually amazed that it's only using about half as much water. Nebbia also offers a number of shower accessories like shelves and curtains, which match perfectly with the design of the shower head. The shower head starts at just $199, but the first 100 people to go to nebbia.com/Pakman and use code Pakman will get 15% off all Nebbia products. Remember that the David Pakman Show is made possible by members like you who sign up at joinpakman.com. We have a new unpublished secret coupon code. The coupon code is immoral21 because it's an immoral discount. My staff has been telling me, David, it's too cheap. You shouldn't do it. The morals are in question. And I said, no, guys, we're going to do it. And that coupon code is immoral21. You can sign up at joinpakman.com. One of the things I do on this program is I tell you honestly and directly when a political issue is merely a political football and has a public-facing debate that is essentially meaningless. Now, one such issue that is a political football is debt and deficit. We've talked about it endlessly. Republicans claim to care about debt and deficit until a Republican is president. And then when George W. Bush blows up the deficit, when Donald Trump blows up the deficit, they say nothing. And then now they're back on it because Joe Biden is president. It's a meaningless political football. It doesn't get into the meat of when is national debt good, bad, problematic, interest on the debt, Japan, China, holders of the debt, all these different things. Doesn't get to it. It's just a meaningless political football. It's a deflated football, we could call it. Another such political football, whose public debate is meaningless, is gas prices. Now, if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, if you've been watching this show for some time, you know I never played into this. My position, whether the president is a Republican or a Democrat, is presidents have some, but relatively little to do with gas prices over the long term. And you can fact check me on this. Go back and check out my clips during past presidents, and you will find that I've been consistent. I don't play the gas price games, whether it's during Trump in 2018 in a clip called Gas Prices Hit 3-Year High, where I say, this has little to do with Trump. It's mostly seasonal. Or you go back to 2015 under Barack Obama in a clip called $1.99 gas returns, where I say this really doesn't have to do much with Barack Obama. There are probably about a dozen or so clips that we've done about this issue. In general, gas prices go up in the summer when demand is higher. They go down in the winter when demand is lower. In general, global supply issues rather than an American president impact gas prices. And right now, gas prices are up about 18 to 20% over the last few months. And very quickly, once again, you are starting to see the hot takes blaming Joe Biden. And the story that they are telling is Trump kept gas prices low, Joe Biden came in, and gas prices have skyrocketed. Now, neither is true in a causal way, and we're going to look at it. But some examples, the official Republican Twitter account tweeting, quote, President Biden's energy agenda will raise gas prices even higher by shutting down American energy production. That's not true. Here's Republican House Minority Leader, and it gives me great pleasure to remind you he's the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, including gas prices in his sort of grievance list against Joe Biden just a few days ago.
Look what has happened in the short amount of time they've controlled all. Your gasoline price is up. Biden has created a crisis on the border that he won't admit.
There was also a widely shared Facebook post whose basic message was, when Sleepy Joe came in, diesel was $1.69. Today, diesel is $3.19. Thanks to all that voted for this clown. Now, the numbers are wrong in that post, but the causality is also gone. So I could go on and on with more examples, but here's the truth. This has nothing to do with Joe Biden, and it started before Joe Biden was president. First of all, gas prices move on a delay in response to oil supply issues. It's a much slower process than some Republicans want you to think right now. And in this case, we know why gas prices are up. It's the inverse reason of why they were down in 2020. The price of oil and thus gasoline collapsed in 2020 due to no demand. It costs money to store oil. And when demand for gas is down, you don't necessarily want to keep refining oil at the same clip because there's not demand for it. So you store the oil, and demand was down so much due to the pandemic, people not flying, people not commuting, cruise industry shut down, that the price of oil and gas collapsed. Now, as vaccination is rolling out, as cases are declining, as air travel is returning, as commuting is returning, demand is increasing, and it's actually in some areas increasing very quickly. So gas prices are going up globally. It's not just in the United States. This has nothing to do with Joe Biden. But then here's the cherry on top. Many Republican talking points require not understanding how time works or believing in time travel. If you look at a chart of gas or diesel prices, here's a chart of diesel prices up on the screen, you will notice the increase started in October under Donald Trump. And it simply continued during Trump's presidency in November, in December, the first 2/3 of January. Then Joe Biden took over, and the gas and diesel price increase is continuing. And it is related to demand coming back as the pandemic hopefully starts to wane. Don't fall for this stuff. It'll rot your brain, as I like to say. And it's not borne out by the facts. It's not borne out by the data. It is not Joe Biden's fault that gas prices are up. And importantly, gas prices being up is a good sign that demand is returning. And hopefully, if we keep vaccinating, if we start getting vaccines to more countries more quickly, and we continue vaccinating more quickly, we will see significant economic improvements that, yes, might go with, a tank of gas costing a few dollars more for the average consumer vehicle. New Yorker writer Jane Mayer gave an interesting interview to NPR's Terry Gross a few days ago. And the topic was whether Donald Trump might end up being the first president to ever be criminally charged. Now, as I've said before, I maintain and believe that Donald Trump will never see the inside of a prison cell. Some people write to me and they tell me I'm wrong. Well, we can't say I'm wrong yet. It hasn't happened yet. Some people write to me and say, David, when you say that, it makes it less likely Trump will go to prison. I don't think me saying it makes it any less likely. But the fact that I don't think Trump will ever see the inside of a prison cell doesn't mean he won't be charged. And as Jane Mayer points out in this interview with NPR, which you can find online, there are a number of viable paths to Donald Trump ending up with criminal charges against him, being the first president to have such charges against him. Right now, we know of two possible criminal charges, investigations with possible criminal charges coming. The first is the investigation in Georgia over Donald Trump's now known multiple phone calls trying to get election results changed in the 2020 Georgia presidential election. The second one, and the one that actually predates the Georgia probe, is the one led by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, which is looking at Trump's financial practices. And in that one, tax, banking, insurance fraud, all on the table. And that's the one where they finally got a decision from the Supreme Court that indeed Trump's financial records must be turned over, and they have been. So now Cyrus Vance has those records. Now, as I've said before, the most likely scenario is some kind of financial charges, probably against others at the Trump organization. But still, it's possible Donald Trump could be criminally charged in that investigation. Jane Mayer addresses many of the important questions. For example, Terry Gross asks her whether even if Trump committed crimes, we should just move on because Trump is gone. And Jane Mayer points out, listen, it's true that lots of the countries that charge former leaders with crimes are not necessarily the countries we're trying to emulate. But she argues that if the crimes Trump committed aren't even related to the presidency, if these are business crimes, for example, what reason is there not to pursue them? And this is an important point. We know that every president makes decisions that lead to deaths, but we don't charge presidents in those cases because it would make being president impossible. I'm not saying that I'm against war crimes charges. That's not at all what I'm saying. But every time you cut aid or shift military resources, send troops into war, change some welfare program, do a drone strike, every presidency leads to civilian deaths, some of which could have been avoided, right or wrong. U.S. presidents don't get charged with that stuff. And we can have a debate about that, but that's not what we're talking about here. If we find out Trump was laundering money through his business, who cares if he was president for a 4-year period? It's unrelated to him being president. And there shouldn't be a culture of impunity, as Jane Mayer correctly points out. The possible financial crimes and fraud in New York are significant. Taking tax deductions on things that aren't tax deductible to the tune of millions of dollars, including even some of those hush money payments that Donald Trump made. Exaggerating or diminishing the claimed value of real estate to manipulate lenders and taxation authorities to his benefit. There's a very long list here, and these are crimes in the state of New York. On the tail end of this, the question of prison comes up. Are the things being investigated theoretically punishable by prison time? Yes. Would Trump get prison time even if found guilty? It's possible. Would he serve it? I can't imagine. Jane Mayer says in the interview, she believes Trump would flee the country if he actually were sentenced to prison time. The truth is, I don't think that's very likely. But we're in such unprecedented territory that it's very difficult to predict. My sense is the most likely scenario is there's no prison time and Trump doesn't have to flee. I still believe that's the most obvious and logical scenario. The importance to me of criminally charging Trump isn't to put him in prison. It's twofold. First, it's to show that a president isn't above the law. And maybe that will prevent another president from being as corrupt and criminal as Donald Trump. Maybe that's naive, but that's one important element of this. Secondly, as a very practical matter, if there are criminal charges against Donald Trump, it could just keep him too busy to even think about running again in 2024. And that would be a very good thing. We'll have more coverage of this on the David Pakman Show Instagram. You can follow us there at David Pakman Show. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. If you want to see me, what would be the right word? And that's not really accosted, smothered by a dog that doesn't understand the concept of personal space. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. This is a fascinating segment that goes to the limits of political loyalty, because there are some Trump supporters whose undying support for Trump has no limit. But for some Trump supporters, their support of Trump does have a limit, and that limit is called the coronavirus vaccine. You're going to be probably horrified by these clips. After a year of Donald Trump telling his own supporters that the pandemic isn't serious, calling it the China virus, that you don't need a vaccine, some of those Trump supporters now don't want the vaccine. They see the vaccine as liberal nonsense, especially as they see Joe Biden as the one who is so quickly accelerating vaccination. Nearly 3 million doses the last 2 days. We'll talk about that tomorrow, but that's very good news. So CNN sends their reporter Gary Tuchman to a diner in Boise City, Oklahoma, and it is compelling video. This county was a 92% Trump county back in November. But right now we have some conflicting numbers. We know that most Republican voters still like Trump, but about half of Republicans don't want the vaccine. As of last week, Trump now recommends to his followers that they get the vaccine. So we have a statistical conflict. They mostly like Trump, who's saying get the vaccine, but half of them don't want the vaccine. How does this conflict manifest? Gary Tuchman asks the diners questions about the vaccine. It got awkward and very ignorant. Let's take a look at the first clip.
It's breakfast time in Boise City, Oklahoma. And I have this question.
Does anybody in this restaurant think it's a good idea to take the vaccine? No. Raise your hand if you think it's a good idea. Anyone here, is it a good idea to take the vaccine? Raise your hand if you think it's a good idea. Not one person here thinks it's a good idea? Complete quiet.
So that's already not so good. And then Gary Tuchman speaks to some specific people. And here, I would get the kids out of the room for this. This is ugly, ugly stuff that we're about to see. Take a look.
What do you think about the vaccine? Are you going to take the vaccine?
No, sir.
Tell me why.
Well, I don't trust the government, and I don't trust Biden.
Chad and Misty Hughes are husband and wife. Neither of them plan to get the vaccine.
Just don't want to.
Why don't you want to? If you don't mind me asking.
Because when I take the flu shot, I usually get the flu, so there's no reason to take
So are
it.
you saying you think you'll get COVID by taking the COVID vaccine?
Probably.
Why are you thinking that? The research doesn't show that at all. It shows that it keeps people safe.
That's just my choice.
So that first guy is bad enough who says, I don't trust the government or Biden. Because remember, the vaccine was developed not because of Trump, but it was developed during Trump's administration. Trump is taking credit for it. Trump's people initially oversaw the initial distribution, which was completely abortive. But still, like, the first guy doesn't care. Now Joe Biden is president. Now is when that guy could get a vaccine, and he doesn't trust the government or Joe Biden. But the second guy, the flu shot usually gives me the flu. It can't happen. It's impossible. Doesn't happen. So I will assume that the COVID vaccine will give me COVID. That's not necessarily a Trump-Biden thing. That's total vaccine ignorance. That appears to go beyond politics, although it seems to still exist more on the right than on the left. Let's look at another one of these absolutely horrifying clips.
These women are sisters, and they too are doubters.
Why are you doubtful?
They just started rolling them out.
Well, yeah, but this has been a worldwide effort by great
They claim that the flu can be cured, but still hundreds of thousands of people die from the flu.
Well, yes, a lot of people die from the flu, but not nearly as much as COVID. This is a horrible pandemic, and this is like an amazing vaccine. These vaccines have come out, they're saving lives. I don't believe it.
No. I will just agree to disagree on this subject, I guess.
I'm just not going to take it.
She said they claim the flu can be cured, but people still die of the flu despite having a vaccine. So this is like, it's the brain is it putty? Is it, I don't know what to call it. No one claims the flu vaccine cures flu. The idea is the flu vaccine prevents flu in some, and in others, it makes it less severe. But the flu vaccines are not nearly as effective as these coronavirus vaccines are. And if you wonder, how does someone get tricked by Trump into believing he's going to build a wall and that Mexico will pay for it, that he'll fix trade, that he'll put in a beautiful healthcare plan? These are the same people that believe the flu shot will give you the flu, right? These are the people we're talking about that fell for that stuff and were tricked into voting for Donald Trump. Here's another clip.
What if President Trump came out and was very robust and said, take the vaccine? I took it even though I didn't tell anybody about it. It was kind of done secretly, but I think you should take it. He said it a little bit, but he hasn't been robust about it. If he was robust and said, take it, would you?
No.
Trump's a liberal New Yorker. Why would we listen to him either?
Did you vote for him?
He was the best option.
What's funny about that Trump voter who says, Trump's a liberal New Yorker, why would I listen to him anyway? That antipathy that came out there, that cultural clash, the diners in Oklahoma are like, this guy, Trump in the end is just like a rich liberal New Yorker. That exists on Trump's behalf as well. And what I mean by that is the vast majority of Trump supporters, as I've said so many times, are the types of people that Donald Trump spent his life trying to stay away from. So it's fascinating stuff. But it is very disturbing to see these clips. And some of what these folks talk about, it's like, what's more dangerous, getting COVID or the vaccine? The answer is obvious. Getting COVID is far more dangerous than any side effects you would have from the vaccine. Another question is, what's more dangerous, getting the virus or being that ignorant? Like, what other risks to their lives exist or are created because of the degree of ignorance that they exhibit during interviews like this? It is wacky, wacky stuff. And, I told the story last week of I've spent time in rural northern Indiana. And while I don't agree with the political views of the people there, seeing it and seeing how basically you grow up in a church and on a gun range, that's what there is in northern Indiana, being told that guns and abortion are the two most important things. Of course, you're not voting for Democrats. Because you're for 18 years by the time you can vote and longer by the time, you're older. That's all that's there. And that's all that is your experience. Of course, you're not going to vote for Joe Biden based on what is publicly said. We have to understand these folks because as ignorant as they are, if they don't get vaccinated, it's bad for all of us. And unfortunately, the sort of ignorance is bliss type of thing, it may work for them, but it's still dangerous for many others. So interesting segment there, Gary Tuchman with CNN. You have to see this. A Fox News propagandist and former judge, Jeanine Pirro, abruptly cut off an interview because she says she doesn't tolerate lies on her show. That's beyond parrot. Like, you can't make an SNL skit out of this because the real segment is already an SNL skit. Judge Jeanine was interviewing an immigration attorney named David Leopold. He's a lawyer with Ulmer and Bernie LLP. And it starts going south when David Leopold tells the judge that not much of what he's hearing on her show are facts. And this starts to set her off. Take a look.
Too, that the highest number is because Biden is sending them in.
Jeanine, just because you say my number's wrong doesn't mean they're wrong. And you want to talk about
no,
cruelty.
they're facts. These are the facts.
They're not facts. I mean, very few things that I hear in the show tonight have been facts. You said this evening that the border is open.
Well, David, let me ask you something. If you don't think anything's been...
So she doesn't like that. She starts shuffling around her papers and such. And then when David Leopold says, listen, Joe Biden is actually the one making America great again, she gets fully triggered. She says canceled. She's ending the interview because she does not tolerate lies on her show.
Biden kept his promise. He's putting COVID relief out there. He's making America better. He's making America great again.
He is bringing, David, I'm stopping you right there. I don't tolerate lies on my show. He is bringing COVID into this country after Americans weren't allowed to go to work, go to church, or visit families, or go to funerals. And now he's bringing in a whole pandemic during a pandemic. David Leopold, thanks for being here, and thanks for nothing. Thank you. Still ahead, my closing.
This is the death of irony. Judge Jeanine on Fox News does not tolerate lies. You can't write this stuff. And she truly seems flabbergasted and dismayed that anyone, would have the testicular fortitude to call her out on her own program. Now, my instinct is that David Leopold is not going to be invited back to Judge Jeanine's program. Notice also that she didn't even allow a discussion of whether what he was saying is a fact, which of course Leopold would have been able to defend had he been given the opportunity. But it's all the stuff that the right says they don't do. She silenced the battle of ideas, and then she canceled David Leopold. Genuine problems here. Another media literacy, education, epistemology problem is that in this country, the question of what is a fact is being debated. Now, I don't mean by that the empirical particulars of facts are being debated. Like that would be a debate like, oh, what is the number of parts per million of carbon or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, right? Like we're debating the number. Okay. We're not even debating the relevance or consequences of a fact. Many people in this country, quite literally, don't know what type of statement is in the realm of an empirical, fact-checkable data point and what is an opinion. In the anti-vax segment that I played for you earlier, we heard people being told, you can't get the flu from the flu shot. You can't get COVID from the COVID vaccine. That's an empirical question where we can find it out. Is there evidence of people getting the flu from the flu shot? But then the people we saw say, this is my view of what is a fact. People do get the flu from the flu shot. We are not in agreement as to what types of things are facts versus opinion. And of course, Fox News specializes in that by saying, well, we have the opinion side and we have the news side, but they blur it. And then they, on the news side, report on what the opinion people say as if they are facts. This is what it leads to. It leads to exactly this. And I don't think we'll be seeing David Leopold back on Judge Jeanine's show. And I know a bunch of people said, David, she seems drunk again. Yeah, I don't know. I know that there's been a number of episodes where Judge Jeanine just really seems drunk. Either way, she's a disaster. It's not, I have no idea whether she was or wasn't drinking, but of the, I think 8 people sent me this interview. 6 said she seems to be drunk again. Maybe, I don't know. But what she's doing, the cancellation of David Leopold, I don't think is based on the amount that she's had to drink. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back after this with much more. The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Occasionally, Fox News host Chris Wallace will bring us some kind of like heroic journalism by American standards, but it's really what in other countries would just be called journalism. And today's is perfect because it shows us how easily a talking point that spreads like wildfire can be exposed and debunked if reporters are actually willing to do it. And many are not, or at least they're not well prepared enough to do it. And the talking point in this case is that stimulus checks are going to prisoners. Republicans have, among other things, been saying Democrats and Joe Biden are sending stimulus checks to people in prison. And some senators say it, and then right-wing media says it. And then before you know it, it's being repeated by, Republican voters in diners, the likes of which we saw in clips earlier today. The truth, of course, is that prisoners got stimulus money during the first COVID stimulus package and during the second COVID stimulus package. It's how they work. It's not set up to exclude people who are otherwise income eligible just because they're in prison. Now, maybe it could be done logistically, but a court has actually said, no, you can't do it. And so radical Republican Senator Tom Cotton pulls this bullet point, and Chris Wallace confronts him. Check out Tom Cotton's defense and Chris Wallace confronting Tom Cotton with his own previous words here.
Here is one of your other complaints about the COVID relief bill. Take a look, sir.
Look how crazy some of the Democratic ideas are. I mean, they had a chance on Saturday morning to stop checks from going to prisoners, from going to the Boston bomber, for instance. And on that vote, they declined. Every single Democrat wanted to continue the practice of sending checks to prisoners.
But, Senator, under two previous COVID relief bills that you supported and voted for and that President Trump signed, prisoners also got checks in those bills.
Well, Chris, that was obviously never Congress's intent. The Trump administration, IRS, and Treasury Department did not send checks to prisoners. Liberal advocacy groups sued to try to force that. A liberal judge said they had to. This month was the first time we ever had a simple up or down vote on whether those checks should go to prisoners. And the simple fact is that every Democrat voted to keep sending checks to prisoners. I don't think that's a smart idea. I suspect most Americans don't either.
So notice how Tom Cotton tries like a mini Gish Gallop there. Gish Gallop is where you throw a bunch of stuff out and it sort of all together sounds like, wow, that's a lot. But then when you start going through each claim, you realize there's nothing there. First, Tom Cotton concedes, okay, yes, stimulus checks went to prisoners during Trump's COVID stimulus number 1. Checks went to prisoners during Trump's COVID stimulus number 2. And now checks are going to prisoners during the third stimulus under Joe Biden. But, says Tom Cotton, during the first and second ones, it wasn't our intent. We didn't want them to go to prisoners. This time, Democrats do want the checks to go to prisoners. It was never their intention, he says, but they did it twice. And then they only are making a big deal out of it the third time when Joe Biden is president and Democrats control the Senate. But then Tom Cotton says, this is the first time we actually had an up or down vote on it and it passed. Well, that's because you guys controlled the Senate before and you didn't want an up and down vote. But more importantly, the up and down vote this time was irrelevant because it's already been decided on previously by a federal judge. The IRS Inspector General previously, after I believe it was after the second stimulus bill, might have been the first. I think it was the second. The IRS Inspector General confirmed that they did send checks to prisoners during one of the earlier stimulus packages, and because there were no restrictions on people in jail or prison getting the money. The IRS later was pressured to change their position, and the IRS said, you know what? Prisoners don't qualify for the relief checks, and if anybody got one, they should send the money back. So prisoners filed a class action lawsuit against the IRS and the Treasury Secretary, and a federal judge ruled on this in September. The court ruling said you can't withhold coronavirus relief payments if prisoners qualify from an income standpoint just because they are incarcerated. A federal judge decided. So this up and down vote now was meaningless in the end. And recall that prisoners have to buy their own hygiene products. They pay exorbitant rates just to make phone calls. That's another big scam that preys on prisoners, which we've talked about. Give them the stimulus money, guys. We're talking about stimulus money that went to hundreds of millions of people. There's a couple million prisoners that this applied to. let's not stand in the way. But more importantly, Tom Cotton is such a hypocrite, and his defense is so, I want to say it's so obviously bogus. If it weren't for Chris Wallace saying, whoa, 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 stop the clock here, a lot of people probably would fall for Tom Cotton's explanation. And in fact, many people do, because they see Chris Wallace and they're like, that's like when Shep Smith was on Fox. He's the one guy you can't trust on Fox News. That's unfortunately the perspective of many of these right-wing Fox viewers. But the talking point falls apart so quickly, and yet it still spreads like wildfire. So nice job, mostly by Chris Wallace. This is just kind of called journalism in many other countries, but I would have liked to see him push back even more. One of the things that became super clear during the last administration was that so many of the things that the right accused the left of doing, they were actually guilty of themselves. And we have a word for this. This is projection. You project onto someone else things about you. You accuse others of doing things that you were doing. And one of those things was that the left is rooting against America. And this applied in a whole bunch of different ways. Don Jr., for example, famously said a couple months into coronavirus, I don't remember exactly when, it was kind of, I think, in that third quarter of 2020, Don Jr. said, the left and Democrats are rooting against the U.S. on COVID. Democrats want people to die of COVID to make Donald Trump look bad. And of course, it was completely untrue. There was no evidence of that. But they continued to insist. They also would talk about, oh, the left is rooting for Russia. The left is rooting for China, or the left is rooting for Europe, or whatever the case may be. Things have now come full circle. And in the developing kerfuffle between President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin, we're going to talk about that more on the bonus show. Fox News and Republicans and right wingers are openly rooting for Vladimir Putin now. Is that patriotism? When they say America first, when they say pro-America, is this what they're talking about? Openly rooting for Vladimir Putin? This started when Joe Biden referred to Vladimir Putin as a killer last week. And then Vladimir Putin challenged Joe Biden to a debate. Now, why foreign leaders would debate and people wouldn't say that doesn't make sense, we'll talk about in a little bit. But let's look at some clips. They're all rooting against the United States here. Take a look at this first clip of Fox News propagandist Sean Hannity. Who does he sound like he's behind? Is he rallying behind the American president here? No, it doesn't sound like it.
Now, the question is this. Why would Vladimir Putin immediately call for a debate with Joe Biden with no time to prepare? What have I been saying? What have some of us, half the American people, saying? The media mob in this country, they protect all things radical socialist Joe Biden and his administration.
Hannity defending Putin, challenging Biden to a debate. If it were Trump challenged by a foreign leader, Hannity would say, we're the United States. Nobody challenges us. No American president needs to debate any foreign leader. We do whatever the hell we want. Different situation right now. Here's Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz straight up saying this debate would be all Putin if it happened.
Putin and Biden, it would not end like Rocky IV. I don't think the American would prevail.
Here's Fox anchor Harris Faulkner, similar attitude, saying, of course Putin is going to challenge Biden because Biden hasn't even done a press conference. Biden, by the way, doing a press conference Thursday, which I will be covering live. Here's Harris Faulkner.
I can't help but think, Katie, just a quick follow-up with you, that this isn't also the determination that how dare America talk to us about free speech when their own president won't go live with free media. Like, how you know, it does make us look like we're hypocritical.
So there are two layers of hypocrisy here. First is the idea that this is as simple as Putin versus Biden on rhetorical skills. And none of them want to mention the dramatically authoritarian nature of Putin, the poisonings, the killings, the fact that Putin is accurately described as a killer by Joe Biden. They're silent on that. They won't even concede. None of them are saying maybe Putin would win a debate, but Joe Biden is right. Putin is a killer. but maybe the debate would go Putin's way. They won't even say that. They don't even acknowledge the accurate critique of Putin by Joe Biden. Acknowledging that doesn't mean we go to war with Russia. I don't want a war with Russia. I don't know anyone who wants a war with Russia. But then here is the crowd that for years and years, during Bush, during Trump, they say we are patriots and we stand behind the president, period. It's always America first, never second or third or anything. And here they are just saying, yeah, Putin, Putin, Putin. No criticism of Putin, not even saying Biden's right. Even if he's not a good debater, Biden is right. Putin is a killer. These people are disgusting, but they're also hypocrites. And we knew both of those things all along. Now, one last thing. I mentioned this earlier. When has an American president ever debated a foreign president, in particular at the demand of the foreign leader? What I mean by that is, why are they even entertaining this on the facts? They ran out of things about Dr. Seuss, I guess. If any foreign leader had challenged Trump to a debate, they'd be saying an American president owes nothing to other world leaders. No American president should devote a second of their time debating another world leader. The goalposts aren't even in the same stadium when the president is a Democrat, as is Joe Biden. So we're going to get the press conference. I'm as interested as anybody else to see Joe Biden answer questions from the press in a more extended format. That'll be Thursday. Don't know the time yet, but I will be covering it live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. I hope you'll join me for that. And between now and then, in the 72 hours that remain before Joe Biden's press conference, we will continue tracking what it used to be Dr. Seuss 24/7. Now it's Biden versus Putin 24/7 on Fox News. We have a voicemail number that you can call absolutely anytime you want. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a question about our old friend Rudy Giuliani. Take a listen to this.
Hi, this is Jim from Canada.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I was watching one of your old episodes about Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
You know, back a year ago. And I was wondering, have you heard what's happened to him lately? I mean, last time I heard, about a couple of months ago, he was facing the possibility of being debarred or whatever from, from the legal practice.
Yeah.
That he was going to have his lawyer's license revoked or taken away. And I was just curious, any news about Rudy lately? Just curious. Have a good day. Keep up the good work.
So
Bye.
there is Rudy news. First of all, over the last couple days, news broke that Rudy Giuliani, this is amazing. Rudy Giuliani tried to get actor Sacha Baron Cohen arrested for extortion over the entire Borat 2 fiasco with Maria Bakalova that we now know about. Rudy was suspended from YouTube over election fraud. He may be back on YouTube now. I'm not totally sure, but at one point he was suspended, and I actually saw clips during that suspension of Rudy. I guess the clips must have been on some other platform, not YouTube. Rudy still talking as recently as about 7 to 10 days ago about the election being stolen from him by Joe Biden, stolen from Trump by Joe Biden, and there is reportedly a criminal investigation going on into Rudy Giuliani. So that's the latest with Rudy Giuliani. On today's bonus show, we are going to talk about Miami Beach declaring a state of emergency over the absolute insanity of spring break crowds that have flocked there because it's been promoted as just being wide open. It's COVID freedom, as framed by many. And we're going to talk about this on the bonus show. And it's particularly funny because, as many of you know, we're going to be on, the show's taking a week off next week. And I was actually, being fully vaccinated myself, I was actually thinking with my girlfriend of driving to a beach somewhere and, maybe South Carolina, but South Carolina is not really that warm yet in March. Maybe Florida. I love Miami Beach. And then I saw it's spring break hell. It's COVID hell. It's absolutely nuts. So we decided to go somewhere else. I am going to be going somewhere else, but it's going to be a place that requires testing, for example, to go and this type of thing. And so I tweeted about this over the weekend saying, I'm really glad I made the decision not to go there. and some blue checkmark right winger, I didn't even know who he was, but you'll find this if you look at my Twitter, sort of like tweeted an attack on me saying, you're vaccinated and you're still so afraid of something that even for unvaccinated people has like a 1% death rate, that you're still not coming down to Florida. And within like minutes of that tweet, Florida declared a state of Miami Beach declared a state of emergency and a curfew. So yes, it's less about will I as a vaccinated person get sick on the beaches of Miami. It's more about it doesn't sound fun. I don't want to go and be in a curfew situation with all sorts of unvaccinated, untested people going completely crazy. Now that's not interesting to me. And I felt like instantly vindicated by my choice as Miami Beach is now in a state of emergency. We will talk about that on the bonus show. That's a big lead up. We also will talk about the Biden White House staff cannabis policy, which just led to some people being let go. And we will have more about this entire Putin-Biden debate idea, with Biden calling Putin a killer and the coverage that it's received. We will also talk about that and more on today's bonus show. How do you get access to the bonus show? It's very easy. You sign up at joinpakman.com. That's it. We have an unpublished new secret coupon code. I'm telling you, but no one else. That code is immoral21, all one word, all lowercase. It's an immorally cheap discount. I might regret it. A year from now, I might look back and say, that was disgusting when I offered that coupon code. You can also simply become a patron on Patreon at least the $5 a month level. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right. I'll see everybody on the bonus show. And then tomorrow we're here this week. We're off next week and then we'll be back. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Nebbia is a revolutionary showerhead that saves you money by using 45% less water, but with a stream of water that's way more powerful than what you get with other showerheads. To get 15% off, go to nebbia.com/Pakman and use the code Pakman.